Talk Ava. Learn English with confidence.
Today, we are focusing on something very specific that can change how your English sounds in real conversations. We are going to look at how to use kind of and sort of so your sentences feel more natural instead of too direct.
These are small phrases, but they appear very often in spoken English. Many learners understand them, but they don't actually use them when they speak.
And that creates a situation where your English is correct, but something still feels slightly off in conversation.
If you are new here, welcome to Talk Ava. We focus on real English conversations that help you speak more naturally in everyday situations.
And since the channel is new, your support matters. You can like this video, share it with someone learning English, and subscribe so you don't miss future lessons.
Now, let's look at a real moment, because this is where the difference becomes clear.
I was in a conversation recently, and I said, "This idea is bad." The sentence was clear, but the reaction felt slightly uncomfortable.
What made it feel uncomfortable?
It felt like my sentence ended the discussion. It sounded too final, even though I didn't mean it that way.
So the problem was not the meaning, it was the tone.
Yes, and I only noticed that when someone else said something similar in a different way.
What did they say?
They said, "It's kind of not working the way we expected." The idea was almost the same, but the feeling was different.
That version sounds softer. It leaves space instead of closing the conversation.
Exactly, and that difference stayed in my mind. Both sentences communicate the same idea, but one feels open and the other feels final.
That is a key difference in natural English. It is not just about being correct, it is about how your sentence feels to the listener.
After that, I started paying more attention in conversations. I wanted to see if this was just one example or something more common.
And what did you notice?
I noticed that people rarely speak in completely direct sentences, unless they want to sound very strong or very certain.
So direct language is used, but only in specific situations.
Exactly, and most of the time, people adjust their tone slightly. They make their sentences less absolute.
That is where phrases like kind of and sort of become important.
Yes, and I realized something simple but important. I knew these phrases, but I was not using them when I spoke.
That means your English had the structure, but it was missing a natural layer.
Exactly, and because of that, my sentences sounded complete, but also a bit rigid.
That rigidity can affect how people respond, even if your meaning is clear.
Yes, and I noticed this in more situations. Not just opinions, but also descriptions and explanations.
Can you give another?
Yes, and that final tone made it harder for the conversation to continue naturally. Now compare that with, "It's kind of not working." That version suggests a problem, but it does not close the discussion.
Exactly. And that difference is not about grammar. It is about how certain the sentence sounds.
That brings us to an important point. Learners often sound too certain, even when they are not fully certain.
That is true. When I speak, I often present my ideas as complete, even when they are still forming in my mind.
That creates pressure because your sentence sounds stronger than your actual thought.
Yes, and I notice that this happens in many situations. For example, when I describe something, I say, "This is confusing."
That sounds like a firm conclusion.
Yes, but in reality, my understanding is not complete. I am still trying to figure it out.
That is where kind of or sort of becomes useful. They allow your sentence to match your actual thinking.
Exactly. So instead of saying, "This is confusing," I can say, "This is kind of confusing."
That version reflects your thinking more accurately.
Yes, and it also changes how the other person reacts. It feels less like a judgment and more like an observation.
That makes the conversation smoother. I tested this in another situation. I was explaining something and I said, "This part is difficult." It sounded correct, but it also felt heavy. Heavy in the sense that it sounds fixed and definite.
Yes, but when I said, "This part is kind of difficult," it felt more natural.
That version allows for variation. It does not present the idea as absolute.
Exactly. And that made me realize something important. Real situations are rarely absolute, but my sentences were always absolute.
That mismatch creates unnatural speech.
Yes, and I saw another pattern. When I was unsure about something, I still used direct sentences.
Can you give an example?
I would say, I understand this, even when my understanding was partial.
That creates a false sense of certainty.
Exactly, and that can lead to confusion later. But if I say, I sort of understand this, it feels more accurate. That is where sort of becomes useful. It shows that your understanding is not complete. Yes, and that makes communication more honest. It reflects your real level of certainty. So now you are not just changing tone, you are also improving accuracy. Exactly, and that is something I didn't expect. These small phrases are not...
Yes, and I started testing this in other sentences. For example, I said, "This is kind of strange," and it felt like a general observation.
That sounds natural and slightly softened.
Then I said, "This is sort of strange," and it felt like I was not completely sure how to describe the situation.
That version carries a sense of uncertainty.
Exactly, and that made me realize that these phrases are not just for softening. They also help you express how certain you are.
That adds another layer to your communication.
Yes, and I noticed this again when I was explaining something. I said, "This is kind of difficult to explain," and it sounded like I was making the sentence less strong.
That feels like you are preparing the listener for something that may not be simple.
But when I said, "This is sort of difficult to explain," it felt like I was not fully sure how to define the difficulty.
So, again, the difference is about certainty.
Yes, and once I saw this pattern, it became easier to choose between them.
Another important detail is how these phrases are placed in a sentence.
Yes, I noticed that they usually come before the word they are modifying. For example, kind of confusing, sort of unclear, or kind of feeing, sort of understand.
That placement keeps the sentence natural and easy to follow.
I tried changing the position, but it didn't always sound right.
That is because these phrases work best when they stay close to the idea they are affecting.
For example, "I kind of understand this" sounds natural, but if I move it too far, the sentence feels less clear.
So placement is not random. It follows a natural pattern.
Another thing I learned is when not to use these phrases. There are situations where being direct is better.
Such as giving instructions or important information.
Yes, if I say, "You should kind of finish this task," it sounds unclear.
In that case, direct language is more effective.
Exactly. So these phrases are useful, but they are not always appropriate.
That means you need to control when to use them, not just add them everywhere.
Yes, and I also noticed that using them too often can make your speech sound repetitive. That can reduce clarity instead of improving it. So I started using them more carefully, only when I wanted to soften a statement or express uncertainty. That makes your speech more balanced. Another useful pattern I found is combining them with common expressions. For example,
Yes, but now I say things like, "I sort of remember this," or "I sort of understand what you mean."
That allows you to participate even when your idea is not complete.
Exactly, and it removes the pressure to be fully correct. I can speak while I am still thinking.
That is closer to how natural conversation works.
Another change I noticed was in disagreement. Before, I would say, "I disagree," which sounds direct.
That can feel strong, depending on the context.
Now I say, "I kind of see it differently," and the tone feels more balanced.
That makes your response easier to accept.
Yes, and it keeps the conversation open instead of turning it into a conflict.
That shows how small changes can affect the direction of a conversation.
I also made some mistakes while practicing. At first, I started using kind of and sort of in almost every sentence.
That is a common reaction when you learn something new.
Yes, but then my speech started to feel repetitive. It sounded like I was adding these phrases without thinking.
That can reduce clarity and make your sentences weaker.
Exactly. So I adjusted. I started using them only when they matched my intention.
That is where control becomes important.
Yes, for example, if I am sure about something, I speak directly. But if I want to soften the idea or show uncertainty, I use these phrases.
That balance makes your speech more natural.
Another mistake I noticed was using them in situations where clarity is important.
such as giving instructions or making clear decisions.
Yes, saying, "You should sort of complete this task," sounds unclear.
In that case, direct language is more effective.
Exactly. So I learned that these phrases are not for every situation. They are tools that you use when needed.
That understanding helps you avoid overusing them.
I also started paying attention to how quickly I could form sentences. When I used to speak directly, I often paused to make sure everything was correct.
That slows down your response.
Yes, but with kind of and sort of, I can start speaking earlier. I don't need to build a perfect sentence first.
That improves fluency because you are thinking and speaking at the same time.
Exactly, and I noticed that my speech became more natural. It felt less controlled and more spontaneous.
That is a sign that your patterns are becoming automatic.
I also started noticing these phrases more when listening to others. They appear in many different types of conversation.
That helps reinforce your understanding.
That shows that communication is not only about expressing ideas, but also about creating space for others.
Exactly, and these small phrases help create that space.
So if we bring everything together, the idea is simple but important.
Use kind of when you want to soften your statement and make it less strong.
Use sort of when you want to show that your idea is not fully certain or complete.
And do not try to use them in every sentence. Use them when they match your intention.
That balance is what makes your speech sound natural instead of forced.
Another useful habit is to listen carefully. Pay attention to how these phrases appear in real conversations.
That will help you develop a natural sense of when to use them.
And when you speak, focus on expressing your idea, not on building a perfect sentence.
That shift will make your English feel more comfortable and less controlled.
Over time, these patterns will become automatic. You will not need to think about them.
That is when your English starts to sound natural, without effort.
If you found this lesson helpful, you can support the channel by liking the video, sharing it with others, and subscribing to Talk Ava.
Your support helps us create more practical conversations like this and reach more learners who want to improve their speaking.
Keep practicing, stay consistent, and focus on small changes like this.
Those small changes are what lead to real progress in how you speak.